Hi there, and welcome to chapter 10. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about preparing data for quantitative data analysis. There are four basic approaches, or four basic steps to validating and preparing the data for quantitative analysis. The first step is data validation. Then there's the editing and coding of the data entry itself, and the data tabulation. So data validation is to determine if the survey's interviews, observations were conducted correctly and or free of interview or fraud or bias. So is the data actually what we were looking for? Was the data collected in a manner that is appropriate and that is free from interview or bias, and or sometimes just plain fraud where they punch in numbers? This can be an issue. The they in that instance could be either students who are faking data for an analysis, or actually even sometimes disreputable market research firms or data collection firms. Now, there are five basic processes that are covered in data validation. The first one is fraud. And so, was the person who they said that they interviewed actually interviewed? Or was it falsified? And we do this by retesting or recollecting data from a certain percentage of respondents so that we can double check and make sure that this in fact did not happen. The second area is data screening. Were the proper people actually interviewed? You know, if I'm asking for voting adults, did a second grader answer the questions? Was the data collected in the correct area, or even with the correct screening questions? So is the procedure being followed? The completeness, were all of the questions asked of the respondent, or did they skip over questions, omit questions? And again, was the client, and the final one, was the respondent treated with propriety and respect during the interview process? So the next stage would be the editing and the coding of the data. And the editing is where the raw data is checked for mistakes made by either the interviewer or the respondent. So there are basically four areas of concern here. First is were the proper questions asked. An accurate recording of the answers is the second. The third is the correct screening questions were actually applied. And finally, responses to open-ended questions were recorded properly. Then the coding itself is where we put numerical values onto responses within a question, within the questionnaire. And it is a four-step process. So first you generate a master list of the potential responses and assign values to these responses. You then consolidate the responses. The assigned numerical value is then put in as a code, and the coded values are put in for each response. And then error detection within data entry can be done via cross tabulations and or frequency analysis, looking for out of limits questions, responses to questions. So if I've got a 1 to 5 scale and I have a 7 or a 50 on there, then I know that that particular issue has that particular response has an issue, and we need to examine it more. So you do the one-way tabulations to determine the degree of non-response as well. Calculate summary statistics on the various questions, such as frequencies, percentages, and then communicate the results of the research project, which may be all that's needed in a research project. You know, we may only want to know what percentage are going to vote for a particular candidate. We might not be looking for why or how, but just looking at raw percentages overall as sufficient. Now, cross-tabulation is done, and it simultaneously compares two variables within a study. And then the descriptive statistics are provide us with additional information about the variables and the data that we have collected. And there are two basic types or categories of data of descriptive statistics that we utilize These are the measures of central tendency and measures of dispersion. So again, obviously, as you remember from your stats class, mean, median, mode are measures of central tendency. The minimum and maximum, the variance, and the standard deviation are measures of dispersion. So the mean, median, mode, how closely grouped is the data, and the variance explains how far apart from the central measure the data deviates. And this concludes the basics for preparing the data for quantitative analysis. May I strongly suggest that you look at the SPSS videos that explain how to open SPSS and how to do basic descriptives and frequencies in SPSS that have been provided as well. Thank you.